All right. Hello, everybody. Good evening here on the East Coast and wherever you are online. Hello. My name is Steve Safier. I'm fortunate and privileged and very happy to be the program director of the Human Capital Management Program here at Columbia. It's a master's in human capital management that we offer, one of John 18 or 19, now 18 different master's programs in the School of Professional Studies. And I want to welcome all of you and thank you very much for attending here on campus or online. And I want to give, there's a lot of shout outs to do. In fact, we're going to probably spend the next hour and a half just welcoming people. So we can be as a partner of mine when I was at a consulting firm, we used to refer to some clients as content light. So we're going to be content light. No, I know that not to be the case, but I want to give a real strong shout out to the HCM Club. That's our club that's led by and consists of students who have pulled this together, working very hard to arrange for our speakers, advised by Dr. Solange Shiras and Sarah Daly-Padron. The HCM Club puts on a number of events and really nice job. And I understand when we're finished, they're going to open the bar, which will be even better, but terrific. Also, just a shout out to our community. So we run events like this. It's very important to learn and to socialize and to network outside of class. So, inside class is a good thing. Readings, assignments, a good thing, but very important to what you can learn through School of Professional Studies, through our partnerships with other programs. Special shout out, for example, to John Parkinson and the capstone class of construction management. Thank you very much for coming. So I've been in a lot of organizations in my career, and I have to say the culture here is very collaborative, outreach, supportive. So it's a wonderful community of events. We put events on here so students can learn outside of class as well. And particularly when I think back to an event that Elena and Brad, our administrative leadership team, so there's Brad and Elena may be online. They've worked hard to put this together as well. When we put on events, we try to pick up on what's going on in the world. And when I think back to one of the first events we ran was called the Summer of 2020. And I don't know if you remember what was going on in 2020, but COVID had just hit, the murder of George Floyd. We had HR leaders and including a leader from New York City talking about what was it like to be in New York City and to manage people. And then we had special events. We had a special DEI event moderated by one of our adjunct lecturers, Dr. Cindy Pace, who's the global head of DEI at MetLife. So we've done events like this. And now we're here in the end of January 2024. Right? Mm-hmm. And when I think back at everything that's happened in the world, we don't have time to go into that, but in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think it's a very appropriate time for the club to have selected this as a topic. Mm-hmm. So, and to set this off, I brought in what used to affectionately be known as, anyone know what this is? It's a newspaper. Yeah. And I'm going to read something from the New York Times, put on my reading glasses, which I don't think I had to do back at the first event. But critics of DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives have tried to scapegoat it for everything from regional bank failures to a panel ripping off a Boeing plane in flight this month. The economy and political landscape have changed since 2020, when companies hired DEI officers in droves, at least according to this article, amid a racial reckoning after the murder of George Floyd. Recently, though, DEI programs have become, according to the paper, less visible. And over the past 2 years, hiring for DEI roles has plunged and the number of investor calls mentioning DEI has dropped. That raises a question. Have companies pulled back on DEI, or have they just changed how they approach and talk about it? And I was talking with Jennifer today, it was another article today with Jamie Dimon talking about it at JP Morgan Chase. So there's a lot going on. Now, we're very fortunate to be able to be led in discussion by two experts. So I want to welcome you, and I'm going to present, believe it or not, they are so accomplished. This is an abridged version of their background, but I think it behooves us to go through it. So I'm going to read it to you, because there's no way I could have memorized all this, but I'm going to read it to you just to give you a sense of whom we're privileged to have today. So Jennifer Brown is an award-winning entrepreneur, speaker, diversity and inclusion consultant, author, and diversity and inclusion expert who is deeply passionate about building more inclusive workplaces. As founder and CEO of Jennifer Brown Consulting, aptly named, I must say, a certified woman and LGBT-owned firm, Jennifer and her team design and create inclusion strategies that have been implemented by some of the biggest companies and nonprofits in the world. Jennifer is the best-selling author of 4 books, including the Wall Street Journal bestseller, Beyond Diversity, 12 Non-Obvious Ways to Build a More Inclusive World, which was listed as Inc.'s 2022 books to read. Jennifer's expertise has been featured in media such as, wait till you hear this, the New York Times, the Harvard Business Review, Adweek, Bloomberg Business Week, Forbes Inc., CBS, and many more. She's a sought-after keynote speaker whose thought leadership has been featured as organizations such as, and here's another impressive list, Google, the Hartford, Hearst, IBM, Indeed, Intel, LinkedIn, the NASA Flight Center, PSE&G, Sony, and Toyota, as well as research institutions such as Columbia Business School, go Lions, Kellogg at Northwestern, the Mayo Clinic, William and Mary, and many others. She sits on the Influencer Advisory Board for Sparks and Honey, as well as the L'Oreal Global Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Board. So pretty big stuff. Thank you. And we're really privileged and honored for you to kind of take the time to be here. Sitting to Jennifer's left, my right, just so you can know where we are, David Gonzales. David, welcome. Is a founder, president, CEO of David L. Gonzales and Associates, an independent global business consultancy specializing in global diversity, equity, and inclusion, ESG, that's environmental, social, and governance, as you know, ethical supply chain management, strategic philanthropy, and board of directors leadership development. That would be some assignment on a case study, don't you think? More of that later. With more than 4 decades of experience, David has held senior executive positions with leading worldwide corporations, also not a very slouchy set of companies, Eastman Kodak, ExxonMobil, PepsiCo, and most recently, Global Chief Diversity Officer and Executive Director of Compliance for Merck & Company, subsequently assuming the role of Global Chief Diversity Officer for Bristol-Myers Squibb, where he built Bristol-Myers Squibb's 21st century global diversity and inclusion business strategy and operating plans, driving business performance, innovation, and shareholder value, while simultaneously building a culture of inclusion, all in service to patients and the world. Don't you have any hobbies? David has held various board positions over the course of his career, focused on the Latino Hispanic community, and he currently serves as an executive member of the Conference Board, serving on the Board of Advisors, Human Capital Center, and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Institute. Pretty heady stuff. So I got nothing more to say. The 2 of you again, thank you very much. I think this will be very exciting.
Yes, thank you.
Very exciting. Wow, thank you. I think we're lavaliered. We are lavaliered.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My work here is done.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. What a
David.
great introduction. Hey.
Hi. We would like this to, it's going to be very casual between us. We've got a little bit of a script. We're going to ask each other some questions, and then for all of you to think about questions you would like to know, both in the room and virtual. So everyone in the virtual audience, hello. We want to hear from you, please. We've reserved, we hope, at least 20 minutes at the end of this for questions. So please write them down. Don't forget them. Be provocative. Ask the hard ones. We love it. There probably is nothing we haven't heard.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
You know, and if we don't know the
Seen it
answer,
all.
we're trying to figure it out along with the rest of our field, which is in a challenging time, to say the least. So we'll give you our best thinking, at least. All right.
And before we get started, because I think I love the challenge around being provocative and being insightful. Thank you for the questions. I thought it was really, really important positioning. But thank you, Columbia. I mean, what a great opportunity for us to be able to sit and have a conversation with all of you, both virtually and in the room. And to Michelle, you've done an extraordinary job. Thank you so much with you and your team. Solange, no one ever says no when you call and say, can you? So thank you for that. And to all of you all, whom we see as not only current leaders, but the leaders of the future of all organizations that you choose to go into. So hopefully, write your questions down and let's get started. Yeah.
Favor, because I forgot. Since you're on mic, could you remind people that we're recording the session?
Oh, yes,
Yes.
everybody. So we are recording the session.
Thank you.
You know what we'd like to do is stop recording before Q&A. Makes sense. And that way you can be painfully honest with us if you'd like to be, that we don't want to change that. So David, it's interesting, David and I have not been a corporate diversity leader in 20 years. I've had my own company for that time, consulting to people like the lovely David and incredible internal champions of the work who then hire me and my team to provide services. So that is a little bit about my business that I've grown. We do strategy consulting, training. We really cut our teeth on employee resource groups about 20 years ago. And I wrote some papers that people still use and had a big vision for the groups and was very, very hopeful that we would have gotten further along in that vision. And, but sometimes I feel like this is one step forward, two steps back, especially in these times. But the vision holds, and the vision for what this work could be and what it could accomplish still very much inspire me. And I think we have to hold on to that vision for what we're really trying to accomplish and know that time is on our side, demographics are on our side. So this is a blip, and we've gone through tough storms before. And the work has come back more important than ever. So, but anyway, I just wanted to kind of chart that. So I've been an external for a long time. And then David, you've been external and internal. So what would you like to say about your path?
Yeah, so it's very interesting because first I'm going to do the broad disclaimer right up front. I'm not an HR practitioner. So you all can pick yourselves up off the chairs here and understand that my expertise is really as a business executive who understands how to build businesses and take them to scale, understanding how business performance and innovation are driven through the lens of DE&I, as well as belonging. So what you're going to hear from me is less about the HR processes and more around how do we do the work that we do from a strategy and an operating excellence perspective, the business plan perspective, and map it completely to what I like to call the spine of the P&L. Very succinctly, how do you drive revenues? How do you save money in the middle of the P&L, the cost of goods? So that's been the intellectual framework that I have used my entire career. And it served me well. And as you've already said, I've had broad experience as a business executive. And more importantly, I love to build businesses. So when you talk about transformation and when you talk about innovation and being disruptive, that's what I do really well. I just happen to have disrupted DE&I for Merck and for Bristol-Myers Squibb that put them on the bleeding edge of what I consider to be the future proofing of their organizations in this space. So that's a little bit of the background, right?
And we're, from where I sit, we're really grateful for leaders who manage P&Ls who are leading the Office of Diversity. It's pretty rare. So I would say you are rare in terms of the makeup of his background and the lens that he brings to the work. It legitimizes it. And I think you speak a similar language to your business stakeholders. And one of the things we wanted to make sure we communicated was how important that really is. But it's not the only kind of diversity leader. We hail from so many different disciplines. I mean, literally, there's no one path or one skill set or degree or industry experience that makes you a better or less effective head of a DEI effort. Honestly, in my mind, you just bring different aptitudes to it. You shine externally, or maybe you're very much an internal architect. You don't want the spotlight, but you are a builder and you understand strategy very well, or you're very analytic. And every leader, of course, has a very small team, sometimes no team. And so the challenge, of course, with this work is recognizing your strength, and then if you have the budget, hiring around you to complement those strengths so that you can handle it all. But sometimes we don't have that luxury, right? And so it's been a fatiguing role because we're under-resourced. And we are working through influence, mainly. And you can agree, disagree, or yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think you're raising some really good points because, quite frankly, I think at this stage of the game, and witness what the New York Times has just recently written witnessed what the Supreme Court ruling has just recently been. We are at an absolute critical pivotal point in this particular discipline and in this particular practice. And let me just give you a little bit of history, because I think it'd be important to inform the audience around the history. And as I look across the audience, I'm not sure that many of you may have even been born in 1960, but in the 60s, there was the push around civil rights advocacy, in which so many of the important policies and laws of the land were set. And the role at that particular stage many times was done by individuals who were absolute advocates of the work in DE&I. And then you move along to the period between the 80s from the 60s into the 80s and into the 90s, where it was really about compliance. And the people that were really in that particular role were the lawyers, right? How many times have we been up against that particular generation of leaders in which things were much more compliance driven? We move into the early 2000s, in which there was a lot of HR involvement around support to the business. What is the race? What is the gender? What are the things that we're really trying to measure? And now, which is one of the reasons that we're so excited about this conversation, is that the business environment has changed so significantly in terms of hyper-competitiveness, all the geopolitical tensions that are out there, climate changes, social injustice. All these things have really begun to change the dimension of that particular role for the chief diversity officer. And so when we talk about what are the skills and capabilities and the accountabilities, you're right, Jennifer. It takes a lot of different skills now, because you're moving from the internal advocate who was passionate about the work during the civil rights era, all the way now, fast forward, to where they're having to really manage the business from a highly strategic business integration perspective, which requires a very different set of skills. Now, I'm just going to make one statement, and that is I've never met, let me reframe that. In many of the conversations that I've had with CEOs and even board of directors, they comment on the fallout of CDOs currently in today's environment, and why aren't they retaining the CDOs given all the political pressures and all the performance pressures? And it dawned on me was that many times they're putting people into place that perhaps don't have the right skills and capabilities in those roles. And who would have thought, as a CFO, you would never pull somebody out of HR and stick them into a CFO role, right? You just wouldn't do that. But a lot of the CDO roles, unfortunately, come from positions of individuals who perhaps don't have the business skills and acumen necessary to be able to drive an organization. That is why, as you and I have chatted about, being from the business side, managing P&Ls, understanding the culture of an organization, and being wise about what it means to manage the organization is absolutely imperative, I believe, for going forward.
Yeah.
I don't know if you, what's your view on that?
I think the history is so important. You said DEI, and you were talking about the 60s, 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
There was no I and there was no E. Back then, when I started 25 years ago, it was just D, and we looked at counting the heads. Right. And it was race and gender, and then slowly LGBT. There was no Q, there was no plus. There was actually GLBT when I really started 25 years ago, and we flipped the L and the G. I remember when that happened, actually. And that was that first salvo of let's change our language to be more inclusive, that the communities of identity went through and continue to go through. I think that the requirements for this job, they've never really been clear. And honestly, it depends what company you work for, what CEO you work for, what they want from the function, what they expect. I think definitionally, it's all over the map because some companies really, they might want more of an evangelist, somebody who's more of a messenger, somebody who's out there spreading the word about how amazing the product is. How many of you know Textio? Do you all know Textio? Oh, they're like HR tech. They're an anti-biasing software that looks through language and debiases language, so suggests alternate words and phrases through the use of a carefully trained AI. It's very interesting, but it's 100 people. A lot of companies are using Textio, and that CDO, goes on road shows, talks about the product, So I think it probably the fit depends on the nature of the business, the personality. My friend describes different practitioners as what we call ourselves ish. Some of us work with heat and some of us work with light. I've heard it described in that way. So as teachers and educators, I have clients, I tend to be a light worker, perhaps, but I have lots of wonderful colleagues who bring the heat. And, we're a nice complement too, because I believe this work needs a lot of messengers. Each one of us is going to describe it differently, bring it to life differently, connect with people differently. Each culture needs a unique messenger, I think, because they have their own kind of preferences. So it's an ongoing question, I think. Like,
Yeah.
and then what kind of training then do you seek if this is something you think you want to make your career? It's a great question. I mean, you've dipped in and out of non-D&I roles and you coming from the business back and forth. And it makes you invaluable.
Right.
I
And
think.
so thank you for that, because I think that's an important message for this particular audience. My background, I'm a chemical engineer by background. I've also got my master's in from Carnegie Mellon University, both undergraduate and graduate. But my focus for my MBA was on entrepreneurship as well as international finance. So, my career path, and I tell you this all to say, because I want to build up to the role of the CDO, is that I started off as an engineer, a research engineer on the bench at Eastman Kodak. I went into the oil and gas industry primarily because of the fact that I wanted to understand, how do you take risk with big multi-billion-dollar investments, and what does big data and analytics really mean in that industry? I also really enjoy transforming industries. And so I went into the investment banking industry, buying and selling refineries for almost 10 years. I'm an entrepreneur as well, and really understood the notion of how do you transform industries and raise venture capital. In fact, just down the street with Allen & Co., celebrated, by the way, at the Plaza Hotel. Drinks, but way too many at that evening. But got that done, and then went to work for a consumer products goods company, PepsiCo, as the chief procurement officer. So the thread is around performance, around tying it to the P&L, around transformation. And so when you step into the role of CDO, this is less about the HR perspective around it and more around how do you use that as a strategy to drive your business performance and your innovation. My calls at Merck and BMS were returned primarily because of the external business experience that I was bringing to the table. It was a different perspective on how the business was to be approached. And so what I saw was the ability to shift and lift many models, whether it was the energy industry, investment banking, and apply it right on top of these pharmaceutical companies where the patient was changing before their very eyes, where the technology development was moving faster than they could keep up with the changes in the marketplace. And so this was a relevant strategy that just happened to have the title of Chief Diversity Officer. And so what was important here was it's less about being the CDO, at least from my perspective, and being the Chief Competitive Officer, because I understood how to build business and drive business. And guess what? It took it completely out of the language of DE&I, although it was there, and we talked about the performance of the P&L. Oh, by the way, here's how you're going to get there: by building the collective genius of the organization, creating a culture of inclusion, so on and so forth. So I've never met a CEO or a board of directors that wasn't interested in growth and increasing shareholder value. And that is the strategy for practitioners, I believe, that really needs to be focused on as we look at this incredible time to pivot into performance, right?
Yep. I'll add, so what you're describing is the what, right? It's the structure of the argument. And the argument makes itself, right? Because you're literally saying, here, you want this, here's how you build it. Here's what you need to put in place.
Exactly.
The change management around it is the tricky part. Remember Peter Drucker, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So culture is this like amorphous art to the science, I think, of like lightning in a bottle. Like, how does it feel here? And am I feeling that I can participate in the amazing and correct stuff that you're setting up? Am I at the table? Am I heard? Am I, fighting my way through microaggressions every single day? because human behavior is irrational. It does not follow a linear logical argument for why is this important. Of course, we all agree, but how do we get there? And so ideally, you know, change management, people come to me for mentoring and I say, it's not really DEI, honestly. The foundation of it is change management and organizational change and design and leadership. How do people change? Why do they change? Why do they adopt? Because people can adopt something intellectually or cognitively, like they can understand the argument, but then they can work at cross purposes with what you're talking about because of their biases, because of their lack of self-awareness, because of their fear of change. So you also have to become an expert on human behavior at the same time, because culture eats strategy for breakfast. So that's where I think the complementary, it's funny, you sort of have in the two of us, these two sides of a coin that are very necessary. You've got a culture architect and somebody who is really interested in, so why would leaders adopt? Why are they going to lead on this? What are they uncomfortable with? And often it comes down to really personal beliefs and messy stuff, messy. So you think something's really obvious, and why don't we just go and build it? Well, because we didn't set up the change management appropriately, and we didn't really listen, get feedback, lean into the messy and the unpredictable, think through, you know, how are we going to gain adoption? I mean, to me, I love the skill will matrix. I don't know if you all study that, but like, I think about it a lot. You can build skill all day, but will, how do you unlock the will? How do you spark the will? How do you support and nurture? And my podcast is called The Will to Change, because I think about a lot. Why do people not change? Why do they resist? What's getting in their way? When we feel like it makes so much intuitive sense and it makes scientific sense, you can still hit a ton of resistance. So I would encourage all of you to pay attention to resistance. There's really good information there. There are clues in resistance, but we have to get underneath it to understand what is the source of it. And I'm curious, I'd love to hear when you met resistant leaders. So you laid out this beautiful case, and of course it makes sense. It's the right answer, but it's not that easy. How did you get the leaders across the line to sort of believe about it from here and truly lead? Because, by the way, we can all see through the leader that's leading because somebody gave them the talking points. But what we really want to feel is that somebody believes that this is, and younger talent especially wants to say, this leader means it. It's not just something that they're parroting. They weren't given the talking points. They really mean it. And I think for it to travel here, from here, it's a long distance here. But this is where ultimately it has to land for me to believe that leader, and honestly, for cultures of trust to be built. So I'm curious.
No, I think it's a really good point. And I think, you know, when we're talking about how do you have DE&I as a corporate strategy that is linked directly to the P&L, you simultaneously have to really focus in on the culture. And to your point about one of the most difficult things, and still, although I call it the Holy Grail, is how do you build a culture of inclusion simultaneously? What I can tell you is the work that we did at Bristol-Myers Squibb, we found the Holy Grail. And what we did in terms of building a culture of inclusion, because you're dealing with a medically driven, scientifically driven organization where a lot of the people are MD, PhDs, and it's a global organization. We tapped into some of the leading research that dealt with neuroscience, with the science of habit formation, and really understanding what were inclusive behaviors that needed to get exhibited by every single person in the organization in order to build a culture of inclusion. Deloitte did a seminal study that said that 93% of their CEOs that were surveyed believed that inclusion was directly linked to performance. You guys can go and see the research. You're smart. Otherwise, you wouldn't be at Columbia. It is there. It does drive performance. But the issue really becomes that survey showed that less than 3% knew how to do it. So we were on a journey to be able to provide transformative medicines to patients, which was the ability to really keep that vision out in front of the organization at all times. And we identified 10 habits of inclusive leaders. We then tapped into the neuroscience of habit formation, and we developed 3 specific high tactical actions that every single leader needed to do at every single meeting, at every single global event that we had, that was called Possibility Lives. And those 3 actions had tactical actions underneath that were required in order to be able to help us build this culture of inclusion. All scientifically based, based on the science of fear removal, based on the science of inclusion and what it meant to be a member of that conversation. And we then brought in our HR analytics team to be able to develop the analytics that talked about habit formation, but also habit adoption. First time ever. Quarterly surveys that said, did you adopt? What were the outcomes? And in fact, we actually recorded the information almost at every single meeting. So imagine, if you will, trying to get an organization that's $45 billion with, gosh, in excess of 30,000 people simultaneously trying to lose weight. It was all about habits, right? And we were very successful in the creation of this, but it did involve a lot of change management. Not only the storytelling that started at the very top of the organization, the actual habit adoption that was done by the middle of the organization. And then we had, gosh, 2,000 inclusion ambassadors that were certified in this neuroscience to be able to go out and reinforce the message around the world. Possibility Lives. Read about it. It's out there in the Bristol-Myers Squibb annual report of about 3.5 years ago. So an incredible piece of work. I've never seen it duplicated, but it's more than change management. I mean, it was about habits, and it worked brilliantly well.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is true what you say. There's just such a lack of clarity about what this looks like in practice. I think the good news over the last couple of years is people have woken up. They believe, they know it's important, and they're terrified to make a move. Terrified to change the way they lead, terrified to cause harm, to offend. And so my observation is leaders now are sort of overwhelmed, and they're in this frozen place. And as such, they're kind of holding back. So I think it helps to have come from the science perspective. It appeals to cultures like what David is describing. It's not necessarily going to win the day for all cultures. Depends on the company, depends on the tone there and the professionals there that aren't full of MD, PhDs, which are plenty of companies, probably more companies than not. But the science can be your friend. Interestingly, you can argue, you can train on unconscious bias and talk about the science of it, and it has this strange unintended consequence of making people feel negatively about themselves and about the process. And you probably have all read that research. I think we were all kind of surprised when we read that. And it's important to remember, well, why? Why did it remind people how biased they are and therefore kind of discourage them as leaders? But I think science can be your friend. Measurement, we say what gets measured gets done a lot in our world. What David just talked about moving initiatives from the top to the middle and out is the holy grail of this work too, and it's very difficult to accomplish. I have worked with clients that trained up internal facilitators to go out and they were deployed, and they would work from the inside to do the education versus hiring a firm like ours to provide the external facilitators at scale, which can be very expensive, but can also, I think internal is wonderful if you can do it at scale, because it's your colleagues, it's people who speak your language. It can be hard for confidential conversations. I would argue external is more effective when you really want to get the truth. And we do a lot of focus groups when we're looking at engagement and culture, and we're beginning any sort of strategy process. Having externals might be another way to think about, particularly from identity groups that you are very interested in getting information from, having that safe space that can be created versus doing it all internally. So we're getting into the weeds a little bit, but these are some strategies that in our field that we've tried a lot of things. And I like what you said about utilizing your internal resources. It's developmental too. Anytime you can have internal people be teaching internally, You know, it ups their visibility, it develops their skills, it equips them.
Yeah.
And I think it is much more seamless. But yeah, it's just fascinating. It's a matter of you all, you know, the more organizations you see and work with, the better equipped you will be to predict how these things go. We were talking earlier about consultants. Our stock and trade is how many workplaces we've implemented things in. And we can say, I've done this here, I've done this here. I saw what happens with this kind of thing. If we don't do this, then this is going to happen. So the wisdom, and I love that word, is gathered over as many diverse places as you can apply some of these things and see how they work, see how people respond. It's not predictable, but I think you can see patterns for sure.
Oh, yeah.
You know how things are going to happen, but at the same time, you could get very surprised and be wrong about how something is received in a culture too, as well. So you have to be able to be extremely flexible. As soon as you set your strategy, you need, you know, talk about change management. You need to begin to chunk it out and see, is this going well? What kind of feedback are we getting? Are we getting a positive response? Are we getting a negative response and resistance? And what are we doing with that? And I would encourage you, we're getting a hard lesson in ignoring resistance right now. I think we are getting a very harsh lesson in saying, you know what, you're either on the bus or you're not. Like, get on board with the change. The change is here. We don't have a lot of time to talk to you about your beliefs and whether you disagree with this strategy. If you don't need to work here, we don't need you here, right? And it was secretly I used to, you know, as an LGBTQ identified person, pride would come along and the letters would start coming, right, to the HR and, you know, C-suite. I'm not comfortable with this. I don't like it. What's that flag doing there, et cetera. I don't, you know, feel comfortable here. And secretly, personally, I used to say, I used to love it when companies stood up to that. You know, it was really special for me. You know, I felt very protected. I felt, I will be honored here. It was very significant. But as a practitioner, I can look at that moment and say, is that the tip of the iceberg of the, you know, is that something I really need to understand? And I really need to give some space to hear it, to allow it to be heard, to reconsider, to really listen, and if we need to go back to go forward, then let's go back. But in our headlong rush towards what I think a lot of us agree is what we see in the future, that exciting vision, it can be very discouraging to slow down and take a step back and say, wait a second, we've got to go back to the basics. So, and I think we do have to go back to the basics at this moment. I think we got really ahead of our skis. Lots of people weren't with us. They didn't understand what we were talking about. They're lost in the language. They're lost in the acronyms. And even I am lost in some of the acronyms in the LGBTQ community, you know, and I'm in the community. So we have to kind of remember meeting people where they're at, especially with a bunch of incredibly smart people that are here. It may be even more challenging for you to do it because you're going to be out here. You're going to get it. You're going to understand it. I mean, listening to you talk, it's so inevitable, but it's not about being right. It's actually about how you shepherd. The success metric is how many people you can shepherd towards an outcome and have them understand it, buy into it, participate in it. To me, that's the metric. And if you need to go slower because you need to be more thoughtful about it, maybe that is what we need to focus on.
And Jennifer, you said it absolutely perfectly well. You know, looking forward, as you take a look at the future of these particular roles, my argument is that this role is going to change depending upon the business environment that your organization is going to be competing in. So, you know, the ability, given everything that is happening right now, we have got to change the nature of the conversation right now to be able to say, this is really about how your organization is going to grow, how the shareholder price is going to grow. And oh, by the way you're going to do that is really to truly understand that competitive environment, to make sure that you understand the importance of how do you have a strategy that is focused around DE&I that's connected to that business performance and innovation. But more importantly, once you've decided on that role sits at the proper level in the organization to have the power to yield the resources to create the change that needs to be made in these organizations in order for you to be able to compete. And I think even more importantly is the fact that, barring that, and let me give you an example, patient demographics are changing overnight. Bristol-Myers Squibb, as an example, most recent example, is moving more and more toward personalized medicine, meaning the development of drugs that are specifically for an individual. When you begin to understand that their drug development takes 15 years, if you don't understand the changing demographics around the aging population, the Black and African American community, the Latino Hispanic community, the Asian community, and you're developing personalized drugs for a community that you may not understand, nor does your internal workforce reflect, guess what? You're going to miss the market. And what's going to happen then? You're going to have no one writing the scripts for those particular drugs that has taken you a long time to develop in this changing precision medicine environment. So is DE&I important? Of course it is, because then you're really developing the collective wisdom and genius of the organization so that you can make sure that patients are getting the best possible medicines in the world. What kind of skills does that require? Financial, technical. It requires you also to have a global understanding as to where the world is moving. You've got to understand global migratory patterns. You've got to understand the policies that are happening in Washington that are going to affect your ability to price your drugs. This is really a role that, as you think about where we are currently, where many times HR practitioners are put in these roles, these are very senior executive roles that belong at the same table as a CEO, and oh, by the way, deserve the same level of funding as a CFO would have, as a CHRO. So my argument is the CDO title, as I mentioned before, should even move to the Chief Competitive Officer and perhaps even the CEO. So we're at a pivotal point in time, and you all are the future.
Yeah.
So think long and hard about how you want to manage your career, in this particular space. But I think it's a wonderful time.
Yeah, we've debated positioning of the CDO role for years. The question of must they report to the CEO? Like must, and when I came into the work 20 years ago, that was the answer. And you understand from everything David just said, like why it's so important. I mean, the visibility, the imprimatur of the CEO, the fact that you're at the table with all the senior leaders, there's an accountability mechanism, and really like listening to them report out, like, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? And you maybe have a Jamie Dimon like screaming at everybody, like, hey, I'm not happy with your numbers. I mean, I sat in a meeting, I was keynoting at Chase one time, and he came on after me, and I just couldn't believe how he knew the numbers backwards and forwards about the organization that we were there that day with. It was incredible. I don't hear that very often. They have somebody come up and do it instead, or somebody feeds them the information, but he knew them. So you could tell he's sitting in rooms measuring them and holding his leaders accountable all the time. So, like him or not, it was a show of kind of in that respect, an ideal involved executive leader, right? Who's managing it and pushing it down.
Right.
What's happening though, what's happening is not, I don't know if that's happening at scale. I might say what's happening is offices are getting impacted by the environment right now. They're either getting wiped out or they're getting folded in, and they're being integrated into the work anyway. I'm not sure about the people, are getting integrated into talent, integrated into CSR, ESG, integrated. And so I'm a lemonade out of lemons person. I think about, we've used to joke, it would be great to work ourselves out of a job in this field, because we thought success would be, and it still could be, that this work is integrated into everything everybody does all the time. We are not needed as a separate function. That function has often served not as a strategic partner, as David is describing it, but I think more of like a watchdog, and also as like optics, which are two not great things. Like it's, that's not a fun place to be. You feel like a token, and you also feel like you're the watchdog of, and you're following up with people. And to add to it, you don't have the power and the influence and the authority to do anything about it. So you're working through influence all the time. So I don't know what's going to happen with, I have hopes for that we will get elevated and the work will continue to be called something very unique and be a visible commitment in what it symbolizes. And what may happen, though, is it will become integrated and become everyone's job in talent in HR to know enough about DEI that they are carrying that lens and applying it in all the people strategies. In my experience, talent and people leaders are not deep on DEI. So this is the challenge, and I don't know why that is. You're all students. I don't understand how curriculum gets decided on, but I came from the OD side, and our diversity class was not great. And I never knew I was going to end up being a practitioner, but I remember that class really well. It was not compelling, and it was not really helpful. So why would people professionals not have a deep dive into this discipline as part of their discipline? But we may be heading that direction, and I'm trying to not be bad, good, the world is ending about any of this. I'm trying to just think about, okay, we're going through another change. The deck is being shuffled again. Where are we going to end up? Where's the conversation? Does it need owners? Does it need a function that's called, I mean, at some point it becomes really so controversial too, that because of what's happening, that it's disempowering us to be called that. But the work is actually not all DEI. It's a lot of other beautiful, amazing, important things.
You're absolutely right.
It's motivation, it's performance, it's kindness, it's belonging. It's a lot of things that are not in that acronym. I think we can continue the work in different ways. And we're nothing if not resourceful, that's for sure, as a field. And maybe the pendulum, that pendulum that swings in business between like calling a thing and like pulling it out and making it its own thing and then integrating, right? It goes into the center of excellence and then it gets pulled out as its own function and then it gets put back in. And like, maybe we're just in a swing of that. And after a while, we'll realize when it's integrated that it's not enough of a priority and we'll pull it out again and it will need to be a standalone. So we could be in a cycle like that. And you may have your own opinions about what you think is the most effective too. I'd be really curious to know what you think. Is it super important for it to have its own name, function, or is it more important that existing functions do this well? Because that's going to allow us to scale the work in a different way.
You raised a couple of good things. I want to put to the side just for a moment because I think you're also giving Columbia a challenge on what is in your curriculum today that really talks about the connection between the work that you all are doing and the performance of large corporate organizations. So we'll put that one to the side for now. But I think what is important here, Jennifer, is I think we're running out of time, quite frankly. I think that, if you take a look at the Edelman report that just came out several months ago around where does trust really lie in the world today, and what you're going to find is that there has been a huge drop in the trust in all of our large institutions around the world. One, there's no trust, they have no money, and they have no leadership. And so consequently, what you see is that the public opinion is that the trust has shifted to corporations to take on that responsibility. And that may be the very organizations that you're going into. And so for those enlightened CEOs that really truly understand the competitive advantage of this and how they're going to drive their business, I think they're the ones that are going to act, because I've never met a CEO that doesn't want a competitive advantage for their organization. That's what they get paid for. That's what they get to lead to do. And that is, where their livelihood actually comes from. And so my belief is, who are the people that you want to bet on? Who are the ones that are making the big bets out there because they're playing to win with their strategy around DE&I? Who are the ones that are really making 3 big, quick moves in terms of strategy to ensure that they're going to build that genius, that collective genius of ideas and intellect, appreciating all differences to get to the right answer quickly, and who's then going to be able to, at least in the case of pharmaceuticals, really provide those medicines to patients that are waiting. So it's, I think it's a great time, but I think we're running out of time, quite frankly. And that's why I'm excited about you all being here tonight, at least to listen to something. And hopefully we've inspired a couple of thoughts in each and every one of you around what is going to be your role How are you going to lead? What risk are you going to take as you step into these organizations armed with the best education in the world at Columbia? And how are you going to make a difference?
Yeah, running out of time is interesting. Oh goodness, like generationally, I would say it's a humongous business risk and liability that there's such a gap in generational values between the leadership of companies and incoming talent. I mean,
You're right.
it is an emergency, and I don't know how much more noise I can make about it. There's head in the sand, there's denial, there's I don't want to change, fear of change, there's apathy, there's oh, D&I is somebody else's problem, like oh, my office of D&I is going to take care of it. I mean, there's all this kind of like arm's length going on. And when it is such an integral and important value, one of the most important values for Gen Z for sure, you know, and Gen Y millennial, to not listen to this and to not put these incoming voices and the way they define belonging at the table, helping to architect what the future of work looks like, that can be very uncomfortable, of course, because it's going to challenge the older generations around what they're comfortable with, what they've always done, what's worked for them, what they've gotten compensated for, what they've been rewarded for. There's so many reasons for a lack of adoption, right? And an avoidance. But the avoidance is costly.
Yeah.
You know, droves of people that have way more options career-wise, you know, to start their own things. Why would somebody opt for a miserable corporate experience? You know, why would somebody opt to suffer and be miserable and be traumatized every single day by a company that is completely asleep, you know, and completely with leaders that show no courage, who are not in touch with how things are changing, who aren't vulnerable and humble about the fact that what got you here won't get you there. You know, what we want to see, we all need to be evolving at every stage. Nobody stops evolving just because you're at a certain level or you have a certain title or you're a certain age. And trust me, you and I still struggling to evolve. And you know, does it get harder as you get older? I don't know. It maybe just is different. But perhaps you have more to lose. Maybe you perceive you have more to lose. But I argue to executives, you are at major risk of irrelevance, like major. As a person, as a leader, they'll say, oh, as a parent too, because I really do not understand what's going on, even in my own family, you know, let alone, you know, what's going on with the workforce. There is literally a lack of common language and understanding that's going on. I'm worried about that because I don't know, without some seriously aggressive programs, like I love the idea of reverse mentoring at scale, for example. I really think that we need to flip the hierarchy and stop looking at mentorship as something that is given down from on high and, you know, imparted, but at the very least, it needs to be mutual. And at the most, I mean, Bank of New York Mellon did a reverse mentoring program. I wrote a paper on it, and I was so excited to find it. I couldn't even believe I'd found a living, breathing example of it. And so I wrote about it. And that might be something that all of you want to think about. If you're good writers, when you write things on this topic, people will find you. They will say, thank you. I use your stuff. It's been really amazing to know, like, people pick it up and implement it. You know, even sometimes I don't even know. But they put their millennial mentors, and this was a couple of years ago, they found mentors in the millennial community of identity and then had them be the mentors of executives. And they assigned the pairs and they formalized the program, and they had them work together for a year. And that, I think, that cross identity, I mean, we have largely white, straight male executives who, through no fault of their own, do not have the proximity to difference in order to even understand what that same workplace feels like for somebody that doesn't identify as they do. They just don't have the exposure to that. And so we struggle, those of us who build training programs, how do we get people to understand this? Like, how can I give them the data where they will truly have that aha moment and have that awakening? And it's really hard because when it's not your lived experience, you don't have anyone in your life that identifies as that community. And there's not enough trust that somebody would actually tell you their story and their truth. There's not just a not trust because you're in the ivory tower, you're inaccessible. It can be very intimidating.
Mhm.
And so in 2020, we started to finally, I think, have a truthful conversation across levels. We began to really chip away, and I think it gave us all a lot of hope. And I hate to see that shutting down, and I hate to see companies moving on, and saying, oh, that was then. Because this has to be a part of our hygiene. It has to be an ongoing organizational practice. What we don't know can hurt us and is hurting us. We just may not have the metrics to measure it. It is hurting us. And guess what? People are leaving. This is reputational risk. This is innovation risk, as brilliant people that you paid a lot to bring in are leaving. They're telling their friends. So it's a disaster that's happening, but it's interesting how you can tune out the disaster.
Yeah, Jennifer, let me just pick up on one thing that you said, and that is the appreciation of differences. I'll give you a relevant proof point that I found absolutely fascinating. Being a Latino, one of the things that I've always felt, because it could have been the negative, that, just born and raised in Texas, by the way, a highly discriminatory environment when I was growing up, couldn't speak Spanish. Luckily, I had a very entrepreneurial family that encouraged me to understand why being bicultural and bilingual was such an important part to the business. And so taking that positive model going forward, I remember having the conversation when I was at Frito-Lay, talking about the fact that the migrants that were coming into Mexico just simply don't lose their taste buds when they cross the border. And one of our largest customers happened to have been Walmart, and their market share in a specific salty snack was declining. And so the solution that we came up with was to harness the R&D technical talent of the Latino community within Frito-Lay, developed a brand called Chile Limon, as well as Chili Lime, Tostitos. We introduced it into Walmart and increased their market share by over 30%. Now, that's a positive model around, and you talk about you're afraid about the loss of that innovation. You're absolutely right. CEOs that are not enlightened are putting their business at risk. And so when you put it in the context again around how are we going to increase the revenue line of the P&L, let me show you how. We're going to segment the market, whether it's by the Black community, the Asian community, the Latino community, and here's how we're going to drive sales. Then I'll tell you what, you're going to have a very different conversation with that CEO. And I think that hopefully, as you all go through your classes here at Columbia, that the connection between what you're learning and how it actually drives business becomes more and more evident as you get closer to graduation. That's my hope and desire.
I hope so too.
Mhm.
Yeah. Let's see. So what else have we not talked about relating to the role or the way the work is changing?
Well, I think one thing that we can touch on is maybe even the global aspects of around global diversity and inclusion, because I think, one of the things, and we don't have enough time to go into the particulars, but think about the large societal environmental changes that are happening around the world, not only with the aging population, but around women in senior executive positions, around the LGBTA societal issues, and being able to guide the organization appropriately in countries where you can and cannot even show up, around disabilities, people with different abilities, and really focusing in on how do you participate in that workforce by providing the right policies and procedures for people as well. So the list goes on and on. You can go to Brazil and talk about the conflict that occurs between the Black and the Brazilian communities and the heritage behind that, of the Afro-Latino community. The complexity is incredible. But to win in the marketplace, you've got to understand that market segmentation if you're sitting in that chair and guide the organization toward how do we connect it, right?
Yeah.
How do we connect
Yeah,
it?
I would add, in my keynotes, I poll folks about what they hold under their waterline of the iceberg. So they don't show usually hidden diversities. And how which ones really cause the most covering, to quote Kenji Yoshino, right? The most exhaustion relating to authenticity, bringing your full self to work. And I'm finding the huge
Kenji,
numbers.
by the way.
Kenji's so
Oh,
great.
he's terrific.
Kenji Yoshino's awesome.
Another university. But
Yeah,
great.
yeah, that's true. Your competitor.
Yes.
So what's coming through to me is mental health and a lot of sort of parenting, caregiving stressors that I think the Office of Diversity is not equipped to deal with. So it's an emerging, huge, talk about iceberg that could sink the ship. So the mental health crisis and the crisis of loneliness that we've been reading about, which is really interesting, really compelling. When we talk about who's leading the Office of DEI, it's been viewed in the way past as a place where, you know, non-white leaders were probably the most effective because the focus might have been race and ethnicity and representation from that point of view. And then certainly gender even before that. But I think in the future, the effective leader is going to have their hands around a lot of domains of expertise and knowledge that we do not understand yet, I think. And I don't think traditionally come up when we think about diversity dimensions. So one thing I'm trying to do is tell people there's a mental health crisis in your organization, according to what I'm hearing from your audience. And here's all the ways that it's manifesting. It's anxiety. It is also neurodiversity is going on and is impacting how people learn, how they're communicated with, how much belonging they feel. And then certainly trauma is a really big topic that's coming through as well. So these can be all kinds of trauma. Trauma-informed workplace is something that runs around my circles. And I sit here as a practitioner saying, what is the strategy that addresses trauma as it's showing up? So this begs the question, of course, you know, like executives will sit there with me and say, Jennifer, where does it end? You know, we are not the babysitters. We are not this and we're not that. And there's no way like we can address all of these things. And I don't think there's a choice here. Your employees are bringing themselves and all of it, you know, on every day. And you can deny it and you can say, it's not my problem. You can say our managers don't know how to deal with that and they don't need to, and we're not going to train them. Or you can begin to kind of lean in and say we need to meet our workforce where it is at. And where it is, they are telling us where they're at. And, you know, remote work, hybrid work, all this stuff is actually, I was just hearing a stat that said that people are more stressed out than ever, even though hybrid was supposed to be great for us and we were really excited and it made so many things easier. People are still reporting feeling extremely burned out after the last couple of years. Lots of reasons for that. So the emotionally intelligent organization, what does that look like? What does that mean? You know, what does it mean we take on? What does it mean we talk about? And then what does it mean our leaders need to be comfortable talking about that they're completely not comfortable talking about today? Like almost none of them, because I coach some of them. I literally have to say, let me script this for you. Go say it. Trust me. Just say it. Like, I know that you don't understand. I know how it doesn't feel good. Maybe it doesn't feel authentic, but this is the way you're going to have to lead. You know, I just don't know any way but through for this. People are experiencing what they're experiencing. So to your point, what David mentioned is the Edelman Trust Index. You should definitely keep your eye on that. It's every 2 years, I think they do it. The other one you should keep an eye on is Women in the Workplace. McKinsey's work with Lean In, very important data for you to know. What I love about that one is it's intersectional, so you can have a very educated discussion about what's different for different identities of women. And it trains your brain. Intersectionality trains your brain to see and look for differences and differential impact. Same storm, different boats. And then any organization that ignores that and says, it's a meritocracy, everything's equal playing field, we're going to roll out something that's equal. And this is what's so troubling about what's going on right now with the programs that are being attacked, is that a lot of these programs were differential investments, the ones that are now becoming illegal. I've led many of them. I've led many women's development programs, LGBTQ plus leader programs at banks where people cried in the room, like cried, because they'd never, ever felt so safe. And they realized how much they wanted to feel valued by their institution.
Yeah.
Like, so this is the stuff that now we can't talk about and we can't run. But I still think we can have an intersectional lens, build things, intentionally, and make sure that we're not speaking to everybody in the same way about leadership, because leadership looks very different depending on the body we're in and depending on our day-to-day of how people treat us, how they see us, how they limit us, how we limit ourselves because of the narratives. All of that stuff is incredibly important. So I know it's going to come back. I don't know what companies are going to do. This is kind of a story as it's evolving in the moment. Are they hiding it? Are they still doing it but calling it something else? Are they just going to put things on pause for a while? Development is, if they open up the roster for development to all talent, I don't know if it will diminish necessarily the experience. We often debate, do you exclude to include? It's another thing we debate a lot. Can you exclude to include? Can you have affinity groups and development programs for certain groups without other groups feeling excluded? And why do you have those programs? We that lead those programs know how incredibly powerful and unusual they are, and how transformative they are for the people in them. So, and I know the LGBT programs I've led, we've also welcomed allies in the room, and it's wonderful and different, but it is still incredibly effective. And I think it can be designed in such a way that it may have a different result, but the way you get there might be different, but it's still invaluable.
Yeah. Those are great insights. Thank you for that, Jennifer. Let me just add on to what Jennifer was saying, particularly around many of the what we call affinity groups. I know one of the big transformational strategies that I've led has been to view those groups less as social networking opportunities and more around what I believe they should be, which is really around business resource groups. And the reason I say that is because we did something pretty spectacular in terms of the development of 12 internal separate subsidiaries at Bristol-Myers Squibb that represented each of the affinity groups all the way from the Latino community to the Asian community. And why was that? Because we felt that they had a strategic view of the patient that would allow us to get speed and scale of insight into drug development in order to be able to reposition Bristol-Myers Squibb at the forefront. Each one of those leaders was considered to be a president and CEO of their own organization. They competed for that role. It was described as a general manager global role on the commercial side. They were compensated in that manner. They developed their own teams, their own organizational design, their own business strategies, and connected it directly to the P&L. Let me bring it to life. The Asian affinity group, we were introducing a new drug into China. And because of their relationships in China, because of their understanding of the political environment and the governmental regulations, created the first ever rapid deployment of that drug into China in record time because of their business strategy focused on that particular drug. Phenomenal. So it was less, and by the way, they were also engaged in creating the culture of inclusion as well, because they were deployed in that way. But think about the power of those groups in terms of helping to drive the business. And I say that to say that it's a model that hasn't been replicated again, not being boastful, but you can understand that, and by the way, they competed for their own venture capital, just like Shark Tank. They would come and present just like any other business, and we would then give them their money depending upon the business results. And they were held accountable every quarter by reporting out to myself and the CHRO and Giovanni Caforio at the time, who was the president and CEO of Bristol-Myers Squibb. Real business, real business. So my challenge to you all is, as you go through your master's program and the 18, and I applaud that, the 18 various programs, my goodness, that's amazing. Think about everything that you're learning in the context of how you can add value, because ultimately what we're beginning to see is that people are coming to the organizations that are the most inclusive, that are the most diverse in perspective, that are the most socially responsible. And those CEOs have got to provide safe environments for people to live their everyday lives, because that is what their organizations are being held accountable for, and that's what the employees are holding them accountable for as well.
Right.
So when you talk about the role of the CDO, I think it's going to transform overnight. I think you're perfectly poised to take advantage of it. And I'm hopeful that you all are going to lead in a new and different way based on some of these conversations.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we're out of time. I don't know
We
what.
might be. On that note,